Hello and welcome to another episode of the Carmudgeon Show.
Is this even the Carmudgeon Show? Where am I?
Are you having a stroke?
I smell toast.
Well,
for those like toast,
I do like toast. Burnt bagel has a lovely smell. You are not having a stroke, and viewers at home, you are not also having a stroke.
We hope.
However, listeners might be because they're just wondering what we're talking about.
What we're talking about, yes.
We are in a new studio.
Almost.
Okay, so the beautiful Volkswagen that's behind us is basically where we used to sit when that was a separate room and was the Carmudgeon Show studio. Yep. And now we are where the Revelations cars sit under a light box and beautifully lit, I hope. We'll find out.
Lit. Let's just leave it at lit.
We're lit, yes.
But not like drunk.
Lighted.
We're not lighted. Yes, we're not partying.
We are lit. More importantly, we are talking about things this episode.
Things that make Jason cross, shockingly.
There have been two cars.
Oh, I was going to say 2 Carmudgeon episodes.
What? That
when we listened to them were so outrageous that we were like, we can't release this episode. And this was one of them.
I went on a little bit of a rant because I'm upset.
Jason
was
upset?
Furious. We'll get to that in a minute. But I'm to make sure this is about cars more than it is about me and my anger issues. We're going to make this about the 2 cars that have ruined me and made me almost leave my career.
Okay.
The first was an Alfa Romeo Tonale.
Which, let us, while we're doing this, say that the car itself is like not objectively bad.
No, not at all. It's fine.
Perfectly fine car.
Perfectly fine.
Okay.
And then the Tesla Cybertruck, well, 3 cars, Tesla Cybertruck and now Tesla Model 3 Performance, have made my life so difficult that I've thought, maybe I should just find a new career. So we're going to talk about that
So
today.
you're going to become an archaeologist or a seamstress or an electrician?
Seamster. Taylor, that's what it is. No, my name is Jason, not Taylor. No, we'll talk about that after the bumper. However, if you enjoy this... Oh, by the way, we forgot to introduce you.
And you. We kind of just did. We also forgot to say what this was. This is the Carmudgeon Show.
Oh, I think I started that.
Part of the Hagerty Podcast Network.
Yes, and if you like this banter, and if you like the obsessive nature of us being so concerned with the quality of our product that we cancel an episode and re-record it, which we didn't actually need to tell them about, and make a beautiful studio with a Volkswagen Scirocco in the back. By the way, the studio's not done. This is sort of a temporary setup, and it's a construction zone. You might hear stuff in the background. Things may change. But if you like our obsessive nature, you might consider also joining the Hagerty Drivers Club. Do you like that tenuous connection?
It was emphasis on the tenuous more than the connection part.
Yeah, there was no connection there. But we do have to do an ad read for our patron, which is Hagerty Drivers Club, which includes unlimited 24/7 flatbed tows for all of your classic vehicles, a subscription to our award-winning magazine, VIP special events and discounts and on cool stuff.
Access to our valuation tool.
Oh, that's right. Unlimited
access.
Yeah, one of these days we should actually see if we can actually, joking aside, get through that ad read.
I think you do it better, more often than not.
I sort of joke around and make it a thing.
Oh, you mean you want to do like a just like straight and narrow?
If you like this, like if I'm in the voiceover booth reading this, if you like this content, you might consider.
No, I think no one. Anyway,
they're not going to believe it.
Yes.
Anyway, that is Derek-Tam-Scott, and I am Jason Discount Sandler, Cammisa.
Somebody commented that they were missing that.
Yeah.
And now I add a clap. Reasonably good clap.
That was.
Anyway, good. Jingle time.
Yeah. Okay, jingle. Okay. So as you ratted me out and disclosed, I was a little bit angry the last time we did this episode because I was being...
The Lost Carmudgeon episode.
Yeah. I don't remember what the last one that we recorded.
The last one or the first one?
The last one that we recorded that we had to
The first
kill.
Lost Carmudgeon? Yeah. I think it's permanently gone now. I don't think any recording of that file exists.
What did I do on that?
I know it wasn't you. This was in... I don't know if we're on the 4th iteration of the Carmudgeon Show in terms of like locales of settings. Then
I do remember
this. Yes, this was the supercar episode, and it was basically like 30 to 60 minutes of Jason just shitting on supercar owners, like
not the cars.
Continuously.
Really?
I mean, continuously, unstoppingly. It was really an impressive
we talk about this.
feat of bowel efficacy. Well, I said 30 minutes of shitting, you know?
Okay.
Anyway.
Speaking of shitting, I have a checksum built into this episode that I have not told you about. These are bowls.
Okay.
These are $100 bills.
Okay.
We are going to have a swear jar.
Why?
For the two of us, so that I control myself on this episode. Part of the subject matter that we can...
Wait, explain the rules. I'm interested now.
Every time you say a curse word, you have to throw $100 in the thing.
Oh, well, I can easily retain this pile.
This is not about you. This is about me controlling myself and making a logic-based argument about people who are really on my jock at the moment and not using words that we'd have to bleep out to the point where the audience would just be driving down the road thinking that a police siren was going off for all the beeps. So I'm going to try to not say bad words. And if I do, I have to take out a $100 bill and throw it in the jar, which is
just really more of a bowl.
Yeah, because I didn't have two matching jars. And aesthetics, right? This is aesthetics are important.
We deliver a high quality product here on the Carmudgeon Show.
Yes, we do. Okay. So, I love my job, mostly. And I love cars, obviously.
Some cars.
All cars. I love I do. I actually really do love all cars, as cars. What I don't like is people. And we know this. But there have been a couple moments where I've really had to step back and think about what I do for a living and why I have the dream job that I always wanted and so many other people probably want, and why I'm having a bad day doing it, right? I'm not miserable overall. But the sort of start of this existential crisis was 15 months ago. I got the last press car that I've had delivered to my house for the sole purpose of the sort of Cammisa verdict. And the Cammisa verdict was a hashtag that I sort of invented solely so that I could go back and find my own reviews, because I can just do a Google search or a search for that hashtag and they'll all pop up. And I had a Verde Fangio Alfa.
Is that actually the name of the color?
Yeah.
Verde Fangio? Looks a lot like Verde Montreal.
I saw that. I looked at the window sticker.
Beautiful color.
Because in the last iteration of this thing, we were discussing how big the engine was, and it's a 1.3. That's right. So 1.3 liter four-cylinder. Anyway, so I got the most stunningly greeny, beautiful Alfa Romeo Tonale.
Or if you pronounce it with the English accent, I think it's toenail.
Toenail. Yeah.
Yes.
I have to credit. I don't know if you came up with that on your own, but the Throttle House Boys made me
really?
hysterical.
I heard it from somewhere. I don't know where, but yes, that makes sense.
But so I got a Tonale and I drove it for a week and it was perfectly fine. And I did a photo shoot. The car looked gorgeous in photos. It was like just happened to be one of those evenings where there was a beautiful sunset. It was July of 23. It went out for what was supposed to be a 10-minute photo shoot and it took me like 2 hours because I just couldn't stop taking pictures of this car. It's really pretty. And it's perfectly fine as a car, but I have not been able to bring myself to publish that verdict. And it's not because it was difficult to write or not for anything else, but I'm not professionally is one thing. I am not personally interested in a 1.3 liter four-cylinder compact SUV automatic four-wheel drive thing that's a plug-in hybrid. That has an Alfa Romeo badge on it, but is nothing more than a rebadged Dodge Hornet / it's a Stellantis.
Is the Hornet product, right? Not a rebadged Tonale?
They are both the same car, and so this is a insert large industrial complex company pooping out a car. I almost did it. Almost cost myself $100. Pooping out a car that is just not of interest to me, but also not of interest to what the Alfa Romeo brand should be. I'm very happy to get into a Giulia or a Stelvio. I don't think this car is interesting from a Alfa Romeo historical perspective. And so I just sort of sat on this, and then time went by and I just have never published it. And it's written and I just don't care, right? And so that sort of started this whole like existential crisis of wondering of, am I just getting old? Am I obsolete? Have I been doing this too long? Am I jaded? And I've asked a lot of people, including the Throttle House guys, younger guys in this industry, and they sort of all feel the same way. Like right now, everything is just crap and no one cares about anything. And that makes me feel a little bit better here or there. Then there are those moments where I get really fascinated and excited and interested in something. And I've realized that all of those moments are engineering based. These are times when someone has raised the bar, moved the needle, redefined something about the way the automotive industry works, or how a car is built, or how it's engineered, or how it functions, or how you interact with it, or somebody has done something new and novel and interesting, and I get, to use your term, which I'm going to steal before you get a chance to do it, a brain boner. And I'm going to say brain boner. You called it a brain erection because you're a classy bitch, and I'm not. Very classy. It's just all low. I said bitch.
Does that count?
Of course not.
It's a female dog.
It's a female dog. And so when you look at all of the innovations happening in the automotive industry, you can very quickly find that they are all happening at non-traditional car companies.
Non-legacy.
Yeah. The companies that are innovating are, I don't want to say these words, Tesla, Lucid, Rivian, right? And if you look at Lucid, this is a company that's single-handedly obsessed with efficiency and is the first to hit 5 miles per kilowatt hour on a car, right? This is an efficiency standard that we didn't think was possible. 500 miles out of an EV without putting a 200 kilowatt hour battery pack in it, right? So it's just efficiency focused. And they have done things that no one has been able to do. Car the size of an E-Class with 2 trunks that seats 5, whatever, all this stuff. Then you look at Rivian. Rivian's internal architecture is something, the computer and the network architecture is something car companies can't dream of. And so the big sort of bullet point there is their new electrical architecture has 7 ECUs in the entire car and saves 200 billion miles of cabling or whatever it is.
For comparison, a normal number of ECUs in a car is
300 plus. So 3, 4, 500, all of which are done by suppliers. And each ECU speaks its own language that has to translate how it communicates with the other ones, not every one of them, but most of them, into a common CAN language where they can all talk to each other. But they're all running different software from different manufacturers. And Rivian, Tesla has done the same thing. But Rivian really cracked that to the point where Volkswagen has just invested $5 billion in Rivian so they can have access to that homework. They're stealing their homework.
Yeah, because the alternative is Volkswagen tries to develop their own thing using various suppliers and spends $5 billion to end up in...
Turns out, so Volkswagen's subsidiary that they formed to make their new sort of software-based cars called Cariad, Car-I-M Digital, C-A-R-I-A-D. All I needed to hear was that explanation for what the name stands for, and I knew you guys are going to fail. Like, there's just, sorry. I mean, you want to talk about like Tesla as a name for a car company, or Faraday, or, these sort of intelligent names, and the Germans are like, Car-I-M Digital. Well, you're not. Cariad has lost more than 5 billion euro in the last 2 years.
Impressively efficient at disposing of cash. I don't think, you could put that in your driveway and set it on fire, but I think it'd be more efficient to just give it to Volkswagen.
That's 2 products. That's developing 2 cars, right? They've lost that in 2 years. But more importantly, Volkswagen's total investment is over $13 million in Cariad. $1 billion, I'm sorry. Yeah. And they're about to throw away $13 billion worth of investment and say, we'd rather spend 5 more to invest in Rivian. And just say, this is a startup and we can't do what they do. So they're waving the white flag, doing the right thing, admitting that they're just incompetent. I think it is the right thing. Yeah. And taking Rivian's homework in exchange for Rivian now having access to Volkswagen's manufacturing techniques. So I think it's a brilliant move.
Yeah, because I've certainly heard that manufacturing has sort of growing pains at Rivian, so they can certainly stand to learn about manufacturing from someone who knows a few things about manufacturing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really great partnership. So we have synergistic,
to use a term that I'm sure was not at all used in any press releases related to this topic.
I'm going to have to do a search now.
I'm sure it was.
I'm sure it was.
Hundreds of times.
It's a perfect example.
It is the definition of synergy.
And then, of course, the third car company is Tesla, right? And Tesla was the one that dragged the rest of the car industry kicking and screaming into the future. And so these are the 3 if I look back at the last 10 years, at all of the 12 or 13 years of all of the products that I've really been excited about, especially products that are sort of mass consumer stuff and not like a 911 GT3 that's, very thing.
Yeah, or like a GMA. I mean, if you look closely at a GMA, there is a ton of stuff that also is brain erection material, but it's just so far removed from anything that a regular consumer could interact with that it's,
right.
Meaningless almost.
And, when you compare, look, I drive a Volkswagen e-Golf, which is a supplier-based traditional product.
What does the E stand for?
That doesn't, okay, I drive a Mark 7 Volkswagen, Mark 7.5 Volkswagen. It's supplier-based, right? The Mark 8 became not nearly as good. And this was the tipping point where after PS died and whatever else, for whatever reasons, Volkswagen has sort of gone downhill because they're trying to make this future car. They tried to take Mark 7 and in the transition from Mark 7 to Mark 8, make it modern. And so they made it ugly and they made it cartoonish looking. And then they ruined all of the simplicity of UX that came before it so that they can be one of the cool kids with touchscreens and capacitive controls. And they messed the whole thing up. It's not better than the Mark 7, right? Is it a terrible car? No. I'm also trying to swear off hyperbole because once I get started, I'm going to drop F-bombs left and right. So I'm doing a job as a journalist. I'm saying it's not terrible, even though I would light one on fire, for the record. I had to say that.
Yeah, I mean, the problem with that car is that the previous iteration was so good. Where do you go from there, I guess?
Well, you certainly don't follow the non-traditional car companies down their track and without understanding what makes those cars better. Mark 8 didn't have 7 ECUs and a fully networked system that works. And it wasn't thought out in the Silicon Valley way of UX design, which is what's the experience like for the user. It was some, I want to say a curse word.
Gentleman.
Schmuck, because that is jewelry in German, schmuck. There is some schmuck in Germany who's like, my cousin works at the supplier and they want to give us capacitive touch controls that are not illuminated for the volume. And the temperature.
Or it costs 4 cents less and we're into that idea.
So, but what I realized is every time I get excited about something new and something different, I then get the full ire of social media to come back on it. And it's because all of those new things happen to be electric. And nothing has changed in the last 20 years. Sorry, I just have to make myself a note for a future episode.
Did it come back to you?
Yeah, a couple minutes ago, Inside Baseball, I walked in, I'm like, hey, Derek, I just thought on the way here, I thought of a really great episode concept for us. And then I forgot
promptly
what it was.
forgot it.
So I just remembered. If you look at the last 20 years of internal combustion engines, nothing has changed.
Nothing in a sort of seismic fashion. There's a lot of optimizing. I mean, the thing is that the internal combustion engine was invented in the mid 1800s. Yeah, I mean, it was commercialized, I guess, in 1886 for a car. I don't know. It was probably before that. In any case, we had a lot of time to figure this stuff out.
And we've had a continual evolution, right? Push rods or side valves became overhead valves, became overhead camshafts, became overhead camshafts with variable valve timing. We've had this sort of progression. And the last big, I wouldn't call it even a seismic shift, but the last big real innovation was the holy trinity of variable valve timing plus turbocharging plus direct injection. And that allowed the turbocharger to be a conventional sort of thing that goes in every car and actually does save fuel in some cases and does give more power.
If you're light of foot.
Yeah. And since then, that was 20 something years ago. It was 2007. This really started. GDI really started. And by the time we got to 2012, we were well underway with this, the Ford EcoBoost strategy and BMW Twin Power Turbo and all these, companies have their brand names for this. Nothing has changed. And in a decade, nothing has gotten better. We had
everything
DCT,
is just you add hybridization basically to that.
And none of that is done in favor of a better driving
electric
experience.
Turbochargers. That's a new thing. 48 valve hybrid.
48 volt.
48. That's what I meant. Sorry. You can tell what decade
hybridization
I'm from.
started in the 90s. Toyota figured this out, did a joint effort with GM. So the hybrid synergy drive was a joint effort between Toyota and GM. And of course, GM was like, nah, nobody needs this, and walked away and gave permission to Toyota to just do whatever you want with that. Like, we don't need that, which is fascinating. Anyway, that was invented. And there's a continual evolution of hybridization to help, both in terms of the voltage rising, so therefore you can get more power out of it and more efficiency through that system. But also now Mercedes debuted the world's first electric turbocharger, which then Porsche is doing the same thing. Again, probably supplier driven. But which way
does that arrow flow?
I don't know. I don't think the car companies have all that much influence on what the suppliers do anymore. I think the power lies with the suppliers, which is why every German car now has rear wheel steering, because ZF Lenksysteme GmbH, ZF, said, and I know this to be the case on Porsches, if you want to buy this rear wheel steering system for whatever car, you're going to have to propagate it through your whole lineup. And then BMW engineer told me the same thing. We don't have a choice. That's why they all went to electric power steering. ZF said, we're stopping development on hydraulic systems, and that was it. So the suppliers are the ones that hold all the power at this point. And so, Cybertruck comes out, and Cybertruck is the single biggest mistake I've made in my career. And reviewing the car, I should have just said no. And the reviewing is the wrong word. Hold on. Making an icons video on the Cybertruck the way we did was a mistake, because as I've said before in this podcast, very clearly, we had limited access to the car, and the access that we had was all the engineering backstory. And I got a lot of time and a lot of background knowledge on that car. And talk about brain boner. There was brain fluid oozing out for days while I was writing that script. That thing advances the art of the automobile in several key ways, unlike anything I've seen in my 20 years of doing this, right? Nothing since Model S itself, the original sort of electric vehicle, moved the bar that much. And what I'm talking about, the steer-by-wire system, the 48-volt internal system, the exoskeleton to a slightly lesser extent, but there are a lot of innovations in that car that just are different, right? And they are individually better. Taken as a whole, that truck can only exist because of those innovations. What I didn't say in the review, because I didn't get a chance to really review it, was I didn't drive this car on the street. I didn't talk about the greater societal implications of the car and whether I think it makes a better pickup truck. I think I said in the video I would take a Rivian, right? And I think a traditional pickup truck shape works better for traditional pickup truck duties, right? But I definitely...
You said duty.
D-U-T-Y, not D-O-O-D-I-E. And also, the rule here is if a 12-year-old, 14-year-old can say it in front of his mother without getting slapped across the face, it doesn't count. That's why you let me say bitch. NC-17, or pick one. Anyway, but that was, I got so much hate over the Cybertruck, up to and including the whole Matt Farah, having to go on Smoking Tire podcast and defend myself because he just assumed that I got a lot of things wrong, and he, love you, Matt, made a fool out of himself because I didn't, right? He just didn't know any better. And his feeling on the Cybertruck was so politicized that he got angry that I said nice things about it. That was a really big pain in my backside to deal with the fallout from that. And it was, I still hear all the time, Jason lost all of his credibility as a journalist on Cybertruck. I hear this continually. Go fly a kite, right? I didn't lose my credibility. I didn't get anything wrong. What I did was applaud Tesla for changing the way a car is built. Tesla didn't pay me any money. No one's ever paid me any money. There was no lack of objectivity. What I failed to do, and I've said this on this podcast, is really disclose like, hey, this is not a full review. It seemed like it, and that was the problem. And now we get to Tesla Model 3 performance. You were there.
I was there on the drag race episode in which you pitted the Tesla Model 3 performance against the M3 comp against the C63 alphabet soup letters, whatever the heck that thing is called.
Mercedes-AMG C63 SE performance.
Sure.
Okay. So the concept was very simple. here we are for the first time ever as an automotive enthusiast, where we have compact, quote unquote, compact sports sedans that are available in full internal combustion, fully electric, and hybrid. So the full spectrum, basically. And our question was, which is quickest, right? And looking at the numbers, it was going to be really close. And everyone loves a close race, right? So what we did was drag race them. That was it. And oh my God, here again with the backlash, right? So what happened was the BMW won, and this was not a regular M3. What was available at the time, thanks to BMW's press fleet, was an M3 CS, which is 543 horsepower rated, special edition of the car that's got more power than the regular one. And so we got the cars from the manufacturers and raced them. The BMW won. It beat the Tesla through the quarter mile by a 1/10. Great. I don't care. Personally, like, I'm not really a straight line speed kind of guy, but here's a show called Cammisa's Ultimate Drag Race Replay. The USP of the show is that we do the replay, meaning I freeze time and we sort of discuss what just happened and analyze. I don't have a vested interest one way or another, and who cares? I was frankly relieved that the BMW won, because it was quite nice to have a combustion car beat a Tesla for once, right? We've just never seen that before. And I was like, okay, that's pretty cool. Whatever. We did the episode. It's all good. Twitter. I mean, like, social media commentary is social media commentary. I have a thick skin. I've been listening to this stuff for a long time. Twitter X just goes in a very different direction. And what we have right now is a world in which, if you're a car that you like, or you're a fan of, or you own, or you have a vested interest, or whatever, something you're just fond of, loses a drag race, you don't just get upset about that and say, well, I'm upset about this. You go and attack the person who is driving the car or hosting the video. And you just attack. And I got really upset about this, because it was just so much of the same anger that was levied against me on Cybertruck, of Tesla paid him off. I mean, that the head of PR for a large American general feeling car company called me and asked how much I paid Tesla for the opportunity to get access to that car. And my response I was not nice. This entire pile of money would be in this swear jar. And I asked a question about, are you potentially joking with me, in a very colorful manner, to which I was apologized. After which I was apologized to and said, oh, I'm sorry. Well, how much did Tesla pay you? And then I really lost my poopy over that, because it was just so offensive that another car company would accuse me of taking money or giving money or whatever else for that, right? This was exactly the same thing in reverse. It was the internet saying, you cheated. You purposefully bagged the race to make Tesla lose because you wanted to. Okay. You're there. You were there on this CUTR, which is an abbreviation, not a curse word. Cammisa's Ultimate Drag Race Replay. How did that go down?
Well, we got in the cars, and then when someone said go, we went.
Okay.
Does that answer your...
mostly.
Question sufficiently.
So the inside baseball on...
hundreds of times, it seemed like.
We probably did race triple-digit times. But more importantly, and I think this is really, really important for the audience to understand, CUTR is not... You are not seeing the same thing that you're seeing from Matt Watson's car wow stuff, right? That is two guys lining up with a bunch of walkies, right? 3, 2, 1, go. Right? I get a crap launch, and so my car loses, right? The whole concept of this show is that the drivers really aren't relevant here, right? Which is why we let you drive the cars, even though you don't know how to press a pedal down all the way. Sorry, I had to inject some comedy. So we do this in a way where we're recreating ideal circumstances. This is instrumented testing brought to life, right? So the first thing that happens in the morning is I go and do instrumented testing. And I did instrumented testing for automobile, for road and track, and for Motor Trend, right? I've done this for years. I go and get the best run that I can get. In the case of an electric car, there are some difficulties, right? So the C63 AMG C63 SE Performance is a plug-in hybrid. So we ran it until we plugged it in and then ran it and had it charge itself until the batteries were 100% for instrumented testing. For the Tesla, we had a 220 volt or 240 volt power supply on site. We charged it to 240. I would charge it on 240 overnight, left it there, and then while it was continuously plugged in, had it precondition its battery, and then I put it in track mode, and this is part where the controversy starts. I put it in track mode because there is a bar chart of battery temperature. There's a chart for front motor, rear motor, and front brakes, rear brakes, and battery, right? So all these 5 basically temperature charts. And I want to see what the temperature is as I'm testing to make sure that something's not in the red or even yellow. Or in the case of that car, because I've had some pretty scary experiences with Tesla in the past with their brakes, I wanted to see the brakes weren't overheating because I would like to see that on display before I go for the brake pedal and realize that I have to lop off 70 miles an hour to get around this corner and my brakes are on fire and don't realize it. So I put it in, so we had it in track mode, preconditioned, ready to go. I left the charger and made it the quarter mile or a half a mile, if that, over to where I test the cars. And I did a couple of exercises that I do to warm up the tires, to get some heat in the tires. And then I went and it was a total of 4 launches. The first 2 I did brake torque, whereas I have my foot on the brake, foot on the gas, wait till it loads itself up a little bit, took off. And I went back and watched this video because I needed to know exactly what happened to make sure I didn't screw anything up. And I got okay launches, but I got 2.9 to 60 on both of those launches. But I'm used to Tesla's doing this launch where it's just a violent jerk, which is the third derivative of speed. So it's, bam, and you go. And it sort of ramped up acceleration. 2.9 to 60. Hold on, I have the numbers right here. And it went through the quarter mile in 11.15 and 11.12. So 0.03 of a second apart, which is within the noise of a V-box, which is 20 hertz. So that would be 0.05 apart. At both were exactly 122.08 miles an hour. So to the 100th of a mile an hour, identical to each other. One was facing westish, one was track direction and one was opposite track direction. I typically get better times going opposite of track direction at Willow Springs. This is more inside baseball, partially because of there's a side wind that has a little bit of a headwind component in one direction, a little bit of a tailwind component in the other. And then I get a better time in the tailwind component, but I would normally want to average those speeds. The problem is the surface at Willow has so many tar patches and so many cracks that really powerful cars, I just can't I can't replicate the same times that I get elsewhere. And I found that going in the tailwind direction typically nets me a couple hundredths or gets me to where my times are comparable to what car and driver gets and what I would get somewhere else. And in this case, you can see by the 122.08 in both directions, there was no wind. There was no wind that day, so it doesn't matter. So I did, the third run was track direction. I aborted at 80 miles an hour because I got a 2.91 second 0 to 60, which was, I'm sorry, that can't be. It was a 3.0 second 0 to 60, which was a tenth slower. And I noticed there was a little bit of wheel spin. So I went back, did a little bit of cool down as I do between runs, and then did track opposite direction. And that's where I got an 11.02 at 122.20. So I got another 12 hundredths of a mile an hour out of it. But I lopped off 0.7 seconds off the launch, but I didn't brake torque. And so I got that full jolt off the line. And you can actually hear me say on video, that's the one, right? Because I just knew. I started that run at 94% state of charge, ended it at 93. That was my run. I beat Tesla's quoted 0 to 60 time by a tenth of a second. I called it valid, right? And I knew now that 93% with the brakes now in yellow or red, the brakes were now really hot because going track opposite direction, the second I cross that quarter mile mark, I'm in ABS because otherwise I won't make it to the next turn. So it's nasty on the brakes. So called it good, tested the BMW, tested the Tested the Mercedes, as usual, didn't get quite as good of numbers as Car and Driver did for the M3 CS. That's down to traction. They were on Cup 2 tires, and we were on Pilot Sport 4S's.
Not to mention the pavement.
And I was a tenth, I think, off of what Car and Driver got. Either way, I called all the numbers valid, right? Then we go out and recreate those numbers faithfully over the course of a day, doing 100 drag races, right? The results are weather corrected, which these cars don't really get. The electric cars certainly don't. They're altitude corrected. Obviously, the EVs don't that correction. But we do everything we can to be as scientific as possible, and then we're recreating that out. In this case, none of the cars got any correction, and none of the cars needed correction. When we ran the race over and over and over and over, the results were exactly as the instrumented testing number showed. BMW was a hair quicker than the Tesla and stayed there the whole way through the quarter. The Mercedes was in third place, and that was it. The internet has told me, in no uncertain terms, that track mode cost Tesla the win. And the Tesla fanboys on Twitter are righteously pissed about this. And they're not upset that their car lost. They're accusing me of taking money from BMW now, and they're accusing me of cheating, and they're accusing me of being incompetent, and they're calling into question the 20 years of testing and all the rest of the stuff. And that really, really frosts my cookies. So
appropriately motivated. Yeah, Jason is a saint.
There's got to be is there a saint of anger? Or like a saint
I'm sure it's Italian.
Yeah, exactly. Santo. Oh, can we curse in foreign languages and not have to put the money in the thing? Anyway, so it's very frustrating when you really go out of your way to make a better product. And I shouldn't say better product. That's a value judgment on CarWow, for example. But just make a product that's really trying to be scientific and objective. Again, I don't care one way or another who wins what. Back to the Tonale thing. I don't really care about any of these cars on a personal level.
Neither do I.
Why?
I've always been this way. Even when modern cars were cool, which, I don't know, 20 years ago, right? There was a whole raft of pretty cool modern cars like 997s and E46s, M3s and E90 M3s. I mean, there was just stuff that was genuinely exciting that you could go out and buy. That stuff just didn't really tickle my pickle. I don't even know why I'm circumlocuting. I wasn't even going to swear. Anyway, so I've always been sort of old of spirit, and there's a certain era for me that's exciting, and I think that era ends kind of in the 90s, and there's no...
So were you interested in new cars in the 90s, or did they have to be old then too?
Then I was. So, I mean, yeah, I don't know. It's all extremely subjective. I mean, who knows what anyone likes for any particular reason, but so... I like cars of that era, and I like driving them, but they don't have this sort of emotional lust factor for me. There's very few cars built after 2000 that give me that emotional lust factor.
Same.
But there's lots of people who are very nostalgic, and rightfully so, about stuff like, I always draw on these cars that are naturally aspirated, high-revving manual cars, because I think that's the thing that we can most specifically identify as something that's really been lost, that we just can't get anymore, with the exception of the GT3, although those don't have...
we can get them.
Hydraulic
CRZ GR86. I mean, it's a 7,000 RPM.
Which is a car I've not driven. So
You're still kidding.
Yeah, I know.
Holy.
Guacamole. Mm-hmm. That sounds good. Let's have snacks.
Yeah, there's certainly guac in here.
Yeah, I mean, those cars don't inspire me, but the people are invested in whatever is, I think, available, and that's what happens with Tesla, certainly, and you have to consume media, and the consumption of media, I think, is an important part of the formation of strong emotional reactions to cars. You have to experience the car in some way. In the old days, it was reading about it in magazines and maybe watching it on TV. Video games are an important part of this process, but the stuff that is most easy to consume is about modern cars, and so people form emotional reactions and investments in modern cars. It's also, if you're going to go buy a new car, which is an experience that I think everyone sort of aspires to or enjoys if they have the means, then you are sort of limited to what's available. And as you point out, there is innovation present, although it's coming from places that the red-blooded traditional enthusiast might not find that interesting.
I mean, yes, because the innovation is happening in the daily driver world more than it is in the sports car world and also the attainable car world, right?
Yes, there's I think the subtext that underpins all of this is affordability. Mm-hmm. You know, it was very realistic to imagine a sort of average consumer buying a second or third, depending on the household size, enthusiast car for sensible money, and that would span all the way from like a Integra or Civic Type R, or actually that's really more than a daily driver that's fun type of car.
But 240Z or a Miata or some
sport compacts. This entire genre of cars, which has effectively disappeared for economic reasons rather than because there's a lack of interest from consumers. I forget the point that I was making, but
well, here's where we got last time where we recorded this podcast. You made the really good point that. Well, you made
you were talking about negative reactions to EVs and how that the subject of EVs and being enthusiastic about EVs is sort of this really immensely polarizing thing. And both of the examples that you provided that relate to Tesla have to do with the fact that those people on both sides. There's very good people on both sides. Sorry, I had to quote that. Very fine people on both sides.
Oh. You said we're not supposed to talk about politics.
I didn't. I provided a quote? Yes, it is.
Okay.
But I provided it without context. I'm pitching at the corners here. People get really fired up about Tesla products in particular, both proponents and detractors. Mm-hmm. And it's a company that is political because of the individual who heads it.
It almost cost him $100.
It is weirdly political in some very strange ways. Initially it was a very tree-hugging type of car, right. And so it attracted a particular person. And now, because of his politics, he's actually strangely attracting people of the opposite persuasion.
Well, not
politically.
Really. I mean, so this is the fascinating thing. I just saw another article in the news last week studying who's buying Teslas and who's not. And
was this the Wall Street Journal thing?
I think it was. It was now, I think only 18% of, registered Democrats who were looking at an EV would consider a Tesla, and all of them who wouldn't, it had nothing to do with the product and everything to do with Elon, right? So there's all of these.
Yeah, so that reflects what we expect, right. Is that it's pushing his consumer base to the right because his
the people on the right don't. The car buying public on the right doesn't want an EV.
Right.
And so
he's basically shot himself in the foot.
He's shot the company in its own foot.
Unlike X also.
Yeah. Which is, frankly, I hate, it's the problem, right? It's the problem child of the social media world. I didn't realize this until the Cybertruck thing happened. I don't really use X. I was never a big poster there. And I have all these followers now. So I just keep getting dragged into argument after argument. It's never about the product. It's, first of all,
or the merits or the science.
Right.
Yes.
It's a lot of misinformation about the science, first of all. And I'm not going there, but it's unbelievable the difference in the level of discourse there versus other platforms.
The thing there that happens, and we shouldn't, this is not a subject matter about which I know too much, or should I pretend to be an expert, but what happens is that one of the things that social media has done is that it has given a microphone to any person who can amass followers, and without sort of a vetting process that happens and used to traditionally happen. This is a maybe old-fashioned point of view, and a sort of contemporary consumer would say, so what? It's more democratic, but it also leads to misinformation in the God, you could go so many places with this, right? The de-emphasis of education in the United States from a sort of investment standpoint, or just budgeting, right? If that's an objective measure, is how much do we spend on education, right, has real consequences, which is to say that I think consumers are now less discerning and we live in a post-fact era, effectively, is what has resulted. What is objectively true is no longer material. It's no longer the primary arbiter of what is right. And so you end up with all of these sort of failures of the system, and those happen in the world of politics, and they happen in the world of automotive journalism. That happens everywhere when you have the sort of average level of education of consumers. If you put them all in a big pile together is not where it once was. And so you end up with these sort of non-merit based arguments, which is exactly what you're describing. None of this is about the merits of anything because nobody knows them, because nobody needs to. It is no longer necessary to have the facts in order to engage in discourse.
Right. Discourse is a
charitable
term in this age. Everyone's just fighting, right? Everyone's just angry at each other,
and facts don't matter.
So this is a really interestingly, I wound up listening to part of my like breakdown. I did not have a breakdown. Part of the reason why I was so angry the first time we recorded this, it was just a confluence of things that were happening, right? The Tesla sort of PTSD from the Cybertruck thing with Twitter on that episode. And then I spent a couple of hours, 3 hours listening to Joe Rogan's podcast with Chris Harris.
Have you ever listened to Joe Rogan before?
Never once. Never heard his voice. Never listened to the podcast. Know nothing really about him other than like that he's the biggest
lots of
podcast.
Followers.
Right.
Yes.
And I listened because Chris is on there, and I've worked remotely with him once before. I respect what he does, and I just was very curious about this. And he had a lot of interesting things to say about Top Gear, which was a
original Top Gear. Which Top Gear are you talking
that
about?
He was on in the UK. And I've narrowly escaped the draw of Top Gear a couple times in the US, where they, I sort of tried out and they interviewed me and they wanted me to be part of it. And I'm like, not if you're going to make the same mistakes that you keep making, like for
US.
Top Gear US,
yes.
Right? That's not to say I have all the answers, but I definitely foresaw the lack of success of each one of these iterations, and was very happy to tell them about that and say, no, thank you. When you're willing to fix the inherent problem, call me, right? So I really wanted to hear what Chris's experience was like. They said a bunch of things that were really upsetting to me, mostly Joe, but Rogan, I guess I don't know, I should call him Joe, Mr. Rogan, said a bunch of things that I don't believe are true. And just sort of general misinformation about, like, for example, he seems to be pretty anti-EV, even though he drives a Plaid every day, which is interesting. He drives a Raptor R and a Plaid. I applaud both of those choices. Great. No issues there. But he seems to be anti-EV, but more in the sense of, I don't want the government to tell me what to drive, right? And the reason we're pushing back is not on the EVs. It's because of the government mandate on the EVs, because it's stupid. Don't tell me to drive a car that's powered by coal, because that's stupid, and therefore we're going to push back on that. Okay, first of all, if I remember correctly, the research has shown even in the places with 100% coal grids, EVs overall emit less. Whatever. I don't really care about the science of that, right? That's a different story. But I found it really funny that that's the crux of his argument is, I don't want the government to tell me what to drive. Because, yeah, bro, same. No one does. Mm-hmm. But how fallacious of a world are you living in that you don't realize the government already has? You think that's
the first time that's ever happened? Right. I mean, let us return to 1942.
Oh, what was 42? Was that the
mandated inclusion of
sealed
beam headlights?
Yeah. How about 1966?
Yeah, the Clean Air Act, first Clean Air Act.
Right. So the let's talk about this Clean Air Act for 1 second. This is the government's response to the fact that when you were in LA, you couldn't see the car next to you on the freeway because smog was so bad, right? Mm-hmm. Some adults said, "Oh my God, we're all gonna die. We can't breathe. We have asthma." Somebody works in Pittsburgh and has to bring a change of clothes to work because they're so sooty and filthy by the end of the day. We as a government have to make the decision to be grown-ups in the room and say, this is all fun, but y'all, this isn't good. So we're going to have to take the necessary steps to reduce emissions from cars and blah, 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 blah. And what resulted was how many years of the malaise era?
Yeah, just the absolute, I don't know if they're the absolute worst cars, but they're certainly deeply uninspiring and just generally garbage, which happened also to coincide with, I think, a labor sort of strife time. And so the quality of the cars, construction was poor, but also the engineering was sort of kludged together and reactive, I should say.
In the U.S. car industry, for sure. Yes. Far more so than any other. But the standards
were tighter in the United States, so they had to take more drastic action.
Right. The rest of the world was still using leaded gas until 1990 something, right? I mean,
right. And if you switched something to fuel injection, that was kind of good enough elsewhere in the world, whereas here that was insufficient. There's many different ways to skin the fuel injection cat. And
so look at what, in 1966, the fastest Corvette made could do 0 to 60 in 4.7 seconds, which is a staggeringly low figure for something that couldn't turn or stop.
Yes, it was all done with brute force and horsepower.
Right. And you go to 1981, and a Corvette did 0 to 60 in...
10?
Yes.
Yeah.
10 seconds, because it had how many?
170...
160.
160.
Think about that descent.
And that's a 15-year period, basically.
Right. That descent. I'm sure everyone doesn't want the government to tell them what to do. But
and this was all the result of government mandates to make cars cleaner. It should be added.
Yeah. Why are you complaining about your Plaid? The government telling you what to do when you now have a car that does 0 to 60 in 1.99 whatever seconds, right? That also has the efficiency of whatever. I mean, 120 miles per gallon, whatever else it is. Here's another one. I just did an Instagram post where I compiled the previous 12 months fuel consumption of my mom's Golf. She has a Golf 1.8 TSI, and I have an e-Golf. It is identical. They're the same car, except one's electric and one's a turbocharged with an automatic turbocharged gas engine. They have the same wheels on them now, and she wears Pilot Sport All Season 3 Pluses. I wear Michelin Pilot Sport 4Ss. I tested them both. They have the same exact efficiency, period. That's a different story. My car, despite the fact that...
You tested both those wheel sets on the same car once?
Yes, once. Yes. On an e-Golf. And
to confirm
the same route
that they are...
identical in terms of rolling
resistance.
Yes. Right. This is the best I can do without measuring them, in a lab. So here are two cars with are effectively as fast as one another in the real world and whatever else. Same car. They weigh within 100 pounds of each other. And so I look at not EPA this or estimated that. What did it cost my mom to drive per mile for the last year? And what did it cost me to drive per mile? Now, my mom drives unlike most 70-something-year-olds, I drive unlike most New York City cocaine-addled taxi drivers, right? I drive like a lunatic, and my car pulls 1.07 G on a skid pad, and I'm using it. I don't think my mom drifts around corners. She didn't do a track session in her Golf. I did in the e-Golf, right? So despite how differences in how we drive, we're in the same basic climate. It has cost almost double to power her Golf what it did my EV. And we're in a place where I pay now off peak 31 cents a kilowatt hour for power, which is literally 10 times what my sister pays living on the East Coast. And still...
Well, to be fair, gasoline's quite expensive here too.
Yeah, but it's 2x. It's almost 1.8x versus the East Coast versus, 10x. It's not up for debate. The electric car is just easier. And that started again with the politicization of this, whatever, blah, 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 including things like, you're not talking about depreciation. No, I'm not. And you people need to kind of stick to what we're talking about. This is cost per mile to drive. By the way, I've disclosed what I paid for that e-Golf. With all the incentives that were active at the time, I paid $9,645 for that e-Golf. It's still worth more than I paid for it 5 years later. Leave me alone. Can I just look at the objective energy cost for a second without everyone getting their panties in a bunch? I don't care how much it costs. I'd still drive that. I would never microwave a turkey even though it's faster than an oven. Guys, it's a data point. I found that interesting. It's data. I get a data boner. Leave me alone. Why is everyone fighting over it? No one says you have to drive an EV.
The answer to this is because the subject of electric vehicles has been politicized. There are a lot of things that have been politicized that have no business being politicized, and it prevents people from thinking objectively and actually it's an excuse. It's a mechanism that allows people to step out of the world of facts and objectivity, because as we talked about, we live in a post-facts and objectivity world where that stuff has no meaning or not no meaning or relevance, where it isn't the primary center of gravity of what determines people's points of view or opinions or their feelings on any subject in particular. And so
I find one observation you made the last time we recorded this podcast really interesting, that EVs have been politicized.
But gasoline, that there was no other technological advancement that in the past that hasn't.
You said turbos have not.
Oh, turbos.
I thought that was really that's
true.
Everyone pay attention to this because I don't
even know what I said.
Doesn't matter.
In the heat of the moment.
I took notes. But EVs have been politicized, but turbochargers have not. And so the government is mandating that I drive an EV, and I don't like that. Don't you think the government mandated that turbocharger? They did.
Yep.
In fact, think about it for a second. The E90 generation M3 had a lusty 8,000 RPM, 4.4 liter V8, 4 liter V8, sorry, that made 414 horsepower, 420 PS or 444 PS in the GTS, whatever you want. It was amazing. That was the high point for that engine. And what did BMW do?
For that model.
I'm sorry, for the sports sedan.
Yes.
Let's just back up and say that was the high point for the sports sedan.
And it was like a kind of magical thing that happened all at once for a very brief moment. I mean, you look at the Audi RS4 and the same thing, a high revving naturally aspirated V8. You look at Mercedes was making 6.2 liter naturally. They were literally replacing forced induction V8s with naturally aspirated ones that had less torque, that revved higher because it was a more exciting experience.
Yep.
When they went from the 5.5 M113K to the M156.
Right.
Like, what a cool time.
What an amazing time.
15 years ago.
Right. And what do you think happened?
Fuel economy standards.
Yes, CO2 standards in Europe forced their hands. And it was not, do you think BMW said, let's abandon this high revving concept for the M-Class and just use an off-the-shelf
and everybody
six-cylinder?
always says torque, and that was sort of their way of...
It was
so I was reaching for the $100 bill pile. That is their way of creating an excrement sandwich for you, right? So what the, you know, you do this in PR all the time, is there's some kind of excrement that needs packaging in a handsome way that you sort of hope the consumers won't notice that they're actually consuming excrement, but there's some wrapper on it that makes it look palatable. And so you talk about, you know, the benefits of having a torque peak at 1750 RPM or something like that.
Yeah, and you ignore the drawbacks of having 4 seconds of turbo lag.
Yes.
You were on that shoot in that episode. And so the second race that we did on Model M3 versus Model 3 and C63 was a flat foot sort of street start at zero, and everyone, the gas powered cars are not in launch control, which means they can't load up the transmissions and get full
and
boost,
build boost while they're standing still.
And that M3, which was the fastest car, was left for dead.
Yep.
Dead. So what, to your point, do you really think that is the M philosophy? Now, these cars have gotten faster and faster and faster, and nothing against that.
Well, and they keep
motor
sort of
amazing.
engineering solutions around, which is a testament to the cleverness of German engineering, I suppose, which is, you know, you have protocols in the transmission where they're sort of in anticipation of some gear change are going to build boost in advance, or they, you know, will send fireballs down the exhaust to pre-spool the turbo, or they will open the throttle even though your foot has not requested it in a situation where they think you might need boost soon. I mean, there's all these workarounds, and, you know, then you get to the transmissions also. So there's all these sort of attempted solutions around this fundamental issue of turbo lag, which
is all installed because the government told them they had to. Because you can't. BMW would have absolutely. I wasn't in the room. I can't know this for sure. I cannot imagine M wouldn't have said, okay, now we make a 4.4 liter version of this engine, and a 4.8 and a 5.2. If Mercedes is making a 6.2, we make a 7 liter. Right? That was the trajectory we were on. So it's a fallacy for anyone like Joe Rogan or anyone else to say, I don't want the government to tell me what to do where, you know, EVs are concerned, but think you're downsized turbocharged, and let's face it, the M3 is downsized. It went from 4 liters to 3 liters. It went from 8 to 6 cylinders. Is that engine outrageously powerful? Obviously. Has BMW done the best job they could with that situation? Absolutely. But make no mistake, that C63 AMG, which has a 4-cylinder in it, was not done because it was the right thing to do for C63 AMG, and we all know it. Everyone knows it. You don't even have to drive the car to know that. It was done.
But if you do,
right, you'll really understand it. We need to do an episode on that car later. But, you know, where do you draw the line? Like, all of a sudden now I'm offended that the government is telling me what to do because it's EV. Well, that's because that's been politicized, because probably of Elon's outspoken nature.
It has, I mean, they have always been that way. I mean, they've always been, traditionally, right? Let us go back to the beginning of the EV. It's sort of this fringe activity, and who is interested? It's an environmentalist, right? A lot of the early value proposition around the product and that company was environmentally oriented. They were trying to figure out how to package that technology for consumers, for any group of consumers. This is before you cross the chasm. The chasm meaning in the trajectory of innovation, there is this chasm that exists between like fringe weirdo users who are super into something and it becoming mainstream. And the chasm is what exists between weird fringe users and, the mainstream. And when EVs came out, they were saying, look, we need any consumers. We don't care who they are, what they're thinking about, or their priorities. We just need some group of people. Like, the key is it has to be a group and not an individual. And so they didn't, this was the sort of narrative that they sort of developed, I guess, or used. And it is a very logical place to start. And that is now still part of the identity of the EV to a lot of consumers.
Right. Meanwhile, we live in a part of the world, I just looked up, number in this county, 63% of cars sold here were electric.
Is that PHEV included?
I think so.
Yeah, it must be.
I mean, but look around. I mean, we live in a part of the world where this is just, they're the norms. But San Francisco is strange. You walk around in their Waymos, every third car on the road is an electric Jaguar driving itself, right? That's it's a different story. But I don't want reviewing cars to be politicized. I think that's absurd. But
that is the nature of the planet on which we live now. Everything seems, what very few things are not politicized.
But if it stays like this, I don't want to review new cars anymore, right? Because it's every time I get excited about something because someone has made progress, it turns into a war. And that's really difficult to take. Now, you could say, and
you mustn't take it personally.
Yes. In fact, you said the last time, wouldn't that just be giving in to the to the pressure? And if I just say, you know what, I'm done with new cars, I'm not doing this anymore, giving in and letting them win. Here's the problem. One of the other things that
what are you left with if you say that, though? A bunch of dull modern cars.
Well, there's that. Rogan and Chris both said something really interesting that I think is important. Neither of them ever read any comments ever on what they post. It's post and ghost, I think they called it. That's not the case for you and I, or for you and me. Yes, for you and me. God, I'm bad at grammar. I'm going to put my money in the swear jar just for saying not bad for you and I.
Wrong use of objective versus subjective case.
I read a lot. I don't read everything, but I read on a big video. Usually it's at least the first 1,000 comments, and I'll sort of stop it after 1,000 comments. And as long as the commentary sticks to it, I can take any criticism.
Sticks to the content.
Sticks to the content and doesn't get personal. And just, people, not everyone's going to like me. Cammisa is intolerable. Great. My mom agrees. Like, leave me alone, right? But I think it's really important to have that feedback loop, right? If I make a mistake, and we all do, right? Of course I make a mistake. I spout BS all the time on this podcast that I'm like, oh, but when somebody calls me out in the comments and says, hey, you were wrong about this, blah, 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 I pin that comment, right? Because I can't go back in time and change this. We don't have the ability to fact check. We don't have a second Jake over there who's typing feverishly and saying, no, you can't do this, right? This is a lot of opinion-based stuff. And sometimes we get facts wrong. Me more so than you, because you're weird and you're an encyclopedia and you have that hard drive thing that beep, boop, bop, boop, boop. But if I want to know, I want that feedback loop. And so if Rogan and company aren't ever listening to that feedback, they're not hearing the other side of an argument, right? If he's saying the government's mandating,
which is shocking, and it's not shocking at all. It is representative of the time and that we live in.
But it sucks.
Yeah, it's absolute garbage.
Right.
It is not a dialogue. It is not a discourse. It is it's a monodirectional arrow of people making junk and other people consuming it, and then I don't know. It's like stepping into a room and I don't know, lighting a grenade and then leaving.
So we are doing the next icons that I've never talked about on this podcast about a future icons, but we're doing what is effectively a test to see whether I'm going to just stop doing new cars.
What is so bad? What is the motivation to do new cars is that's where the sort of the mainstream interest lies, and there's novelty there. So there's a sort of story to scoop and break, and sort of what is the
yes and no.
What is the attraction? I guess. I mean, I've talked earlier about how I prefer old cars anyway, and I'm perfectly happy and prefer to hang out in that world anyway. What is the?
So there are a bunch of motivations. First of all, this has been prior to joining Hagerty and doing these videos, that my career was reviewing new cars for automobile, road and track, whatever else, blah blah blah. So that's where I'm comfortable. I had really good relationships with most car companies. Icons was designed to be a new car review using press cars because we can beat them mercilessly, right? So when you see an Icons episode, we have gone through several sets of tires. I've done genuinely unconscionable things to most of those cars. Unconscionable in that, like, it's not that I wouldn't do half of the stuff to my own cars, but I wouldn't do it to a car that I borrowed from someone else. Mm-hmm. And so if I go and say, I'm going to make Icons on an old car, it's necessarily going to be a very different shoot. We have to be mindful of the fact that someone owns this. We can depreciate the value of this car. We can break it. We can ruin it. Like, I broke that Ford Probe in the Dark Horse episode, another one that you were there for, doing a reverse donut. Right? The owner was amazing, Nick Scambaluri, thank you. Like, he didn't kill me for snapping an axle. But most owners are not like that. And I don't want to be put in this. My gut is still twisted over the fact that I broke that car, right? I don't want that. If I break a press car, first of all, modern cars are really tough. Like, they really do put up with unbelievable stuff. If I broke someone's car, if I break a press car, hey guys,
cost
I broke
of doing
your car,
business.
Sorry, right? And that it sort of ends there. And so Cooter was the same thing. It was we're going to do a drag race show. It's just easier. Modern cars don't overheat. They're mostly automatics. So there's just no arguing about the results that you get. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention, Tesla responded. A bunch of engineers talked to me about the track mode thing.
Oh, what are the results?
So that's the reason I'll finish this. So the reason that we did the modern cars was basically just because it's easier for us. However, I think, look, Hagerty is a classic car insurance company, and I think it's probably better for Hagerty if I concentrate on older cars. And I could then say to people, hey, if you own this car or whatever, come and insure your car with us, join Hagerty Drivers Club, do whatever else. It's a great opportunity to market. That hasn't been my job. To Hagerty's benefits, no one has ever said, talk about our insurance product, talk about it. No, we all realize this is a sort of memory structure thing. You watch 10 videos of some dumb,
gentleman.
I would never call myself that.
Man.
Some idiot drag racing a bunch of cars, and you hear the name Hagerty, and then one day you get served an ad for like, oh, we do classic car guaranteed insurance policies. You're like, oh, hold on. Yes, I'll sign up, right? That's what I do. And so older cars are maybe more appropriate, and we're going to see. So we're going to do this next episode. Back to the previous drag race episode really quickly. Track mode could have indeed cost a little bit of time on that drag race, and here's why. It doesn't reduce the motor's output, but what it does is prioritize the cooling of the batteries and the motors over peak output. So you could wind up in a situation where track mode is reducing motor output slightly to manage thermal loads. I asked Tesla to pull the logs on that car. I don't know if they were able to. I didn't go into that level of detail with them, but I did give them a play-by-play of exactly what happened because we have the video. I had a helmet cam on when I was testing it. Exactly what happens. And their advice was, okay, they must have pulled something because they were able to see battery temperature. And so they were, by the way, it's because it's their car, right? They can pull the stuff. So they're like, yeah, you left it on a charger all night and the batteries didn't hit whatever temperature it was. I think it was 30 C until that fourth run. You might have been able to get a slightly faster launch if the battery had reached that temperature sooner, right? So at that point, that tells me, I'm inferring, that maybe the thermal management software was building up the temperature of the battery rather than cooling it down, right? It wanted to be in this ideal range. It was preconditioned. Again, we did what we could. It was plugged in and preconditioned and at 100% state of charge. The advice was you might have been able to get slightly quicker run had you supercharged immediately right before. So supercharge will bring up the battery temperature. And again, I'm inferring that the most efficient way to get electrons into the battery, i.e. supercharging, will be the most efficient way to get electrons out of that battery, i.e. drag racing, right? And so it will clearly get force the battery into the ideal temperature range for a quicker time could be. In the case of this, the battery management system was not actively cooling the battery, so it wasn't taking the 5 kilowatts or 8 kilowatts, so 10 horsepower or whatever it is that it would be using to heat it up, but the battery could have been outside the range. The reality of the situation is,
Wasn't the fourth run the one you used anyway?
Right, that was the quickest run.
And it was when the battery was in its optimal...
It was, but what I don't know, because the first 3 runs I brake torqued, which was not the optimal way of launching. Again, it's not like BMW and Mercedes and all these car companies give me a car with an engineer who sits there and says, we have gotten the best launches. I guess a Tesla engineer probably wouldn't talk that way. But, we've gotten the best launches in this mode exactly at this stall speed. Don't go into launch control. Don't do this. Don't do whatever. I don't know. I don't know what the setting, the suspension, some cars like weight transfer, some don't. I don't know, right? So I have to go into this and use my experience level from the past and say, all right, chances are I'll get this right. Sometimes we don't. I had one instance at Automobile years ago with Don Sherman, who was an experienced tester who's been doing this since I was, to use his term, a stain on the sheet. He got a 7-second 0 to 60 out of an R32, and he's like, "That's what the car does." A Golf R32. It was like, "That's what the car does," and I'm like, "No, Don, it does not do a 7 second. It's got a crap launch." No, he just didn't. No one had sat down with him and showed him launch control. I had figured it out. He hadn't, so he went back out and got a 5.8 second run or whatever it was. Right? We are humans. We are not perfect all the time. But in the case of this Tesla, the only way for me to have gotten that temperature up to where it needed to be with supercharging would be to drive to a supercharger. The closest supercharger to Willow Springs is 20.6 miles away, I think it is. And that's just to get to the front door of Willow. So I would have gotten to 100%, which you don't usually typically do on a supercharger, but fine. Then hypermiled the whole way to the track into a headwind, and there's typically a headwind over there. Even without the wind, at 250 watt hours per mile, which is, I think, the best case you can expect from that car, hypermiling on public roads and not impeding traffic, I would have gotten there with a 94% state of charge, which, by the way, is exactly the state of charge that I had when I did that run. Now, maybe at 100% state of charge, at that temperature, maybe, just maybe, that car could have lopped off up to 1/10 of a second. The BMW would have still won. Come on. I don't have it in.
You are trying to combat things that are not factual with facts. You have to not do that.
It's my job. It's my job to pay attention.
That era no longer exists. We have exited that era.
Then I can't do my job. Right? Then maybe Icons has to die. So we're going to do another one as a litmus test, right? I am a car enthusiast, and even though I don't personally lust for or covet a Model 3 Performance or a BMW M3, the G80 M3 is amazing. I don't care. I just don't care. Right? It's not my kind of car.
Welcome to my world.
Right. It's not my kind of car, right? But professionally, these are the two quickest sports sedans out there, and they are direct competitors in a lot of ways, including their initials, M3 versus TM3. I mean,
which I'm sure was not an accident.
Definitely not an accident, although it was supposed to be Model E, but that's a different story. You know that, right? Ford to Tesla, so it was sexy, and Ford to Tesla, and they had to change the E to a 3 and whatever else. I want to know. I want to know what they're like, not just in a straight line, but around a track. And I want to know. The questions that I have are, number one, which one is quicker around a track? And that's on the hero lap, which necessarily means putting a pro driver in, and not just a pro driver who cut his teeth on autocross and time trials, which means your first run is all you got. Right? So Randy sets his fast lap always on the first run, unlike some other drivers that I've worked with who need 20, 30, 40, 50 laps of a car to set their fast lap time. Randy sets it on the first. And the second one is insert number 0.03 of a second slower because the tires are starting to warm up. He's ridiculous. He's superhuman. So I use him as a tool he will go set a lap time. But then I want to know what happens over the next half hour, 15 minutes. We'll probably do a 15-minute track session because we just don't have that much time. I can't devote a whole day of lapping and then try to film an episode. So I want to know this as a consumer of automotive information. So we need to do a fast lap. We need to do an extended session and see what happens. And then we need to do a backroad blast, and then we need to do a daily driver test, right? These are questions that I want to know. Like, if you're going to spend $50, $60, $70, $80, $100,000 on a car that is a sports sedan, it needs to provide good, normal daily transportation that's comfortable and luxurious and safe and efficient and all the other things that are important to different consumers. And it needs to be able to haul mail on a back road. And maybe it should need to survive a track day. I'm not sure that's a requirement. I think that's a requirement of a BMW M product because M stood for motorsport. Well, stood. It's not anymore. Technically doesn't. It's just BMW M. And I want to know. So I'm going to do this test. But so help me God, if it starts, I have genuinely no idea how this is going to turn out.
You don't? If it involves a Tesla product, you're going to have a firestorm.
No, I know how I don't know how the episode is going to turn out.
You don't know the results of your interrogation of the cars.
I've driven both cars separately. I've never had them together. I genuinely have no idea which one's going to be quicker on the track. I have no idea what Tesla's done this time with thermal management. I know the last car would overheat brakes and start to pull power. I'm promised that's not happening anymore. Great. I want to know, right? And I've driven a Model 3 on a back road and oh my God, it's good, right? Model 3 Performance. I've also driven an M3 and it's like staggering on a back road in a different way. I've never driven them together on the same back road. And I've never just commuted in both of those cars back to back. This is why comparison tests are so much fun, because we put them in the same place at the same time and do this. And I want to know. But if it's, I got to say, and this was the sort of crux of the first time we recorded this episode, which I said with a lot of money in the swear jar, if this starts a storm of hate one way or another, I'm out. I'm done with new cars.
I think
or maybe it's just EVs.
I think it's probably likely to happen.
I am going to bake in some things in the script that will
mitigate or incense. Are you trying to?
Both. Incense in that they need to call attention, right? There's nothing, the problem with the lack of feedback loop from the Rogans and the Harrises and the sort of internet warriors who just don't listen to what anyone else says to them. They need a mirror to their face. And they need to be shown that they're just being a jerk for the sake of being a jerk. Or
but if the people who consume those comments then come away with the impression that you have, which is that maybe I want to leave this space.
People consume the content. They would want to leave this space?
Sorry. If the people who read comments, that's what I meant by consume content. If people who read comments leave saying, I don't want to do this anymore, then nobody does it anymore. Right? Your choices are read the comments and want to quit, or don't read the comments and carry on.
No, I think if I invite people to leave comments in a different way, it's a different story. Look, our comments are not hard. We say some pretty
controversial,
expensive things on this podcast, right? You have pretty strong opinions. You have pretty strong opinions on cars. I mean, you have
absolutely
probably single-handedly cost people thousands of cents on their 355 values, right? That's the nature of a podcast. It's what we do.
There are so many people who consume them without regard to my comments. I don't have the impression
consume
that
355s?
Yes.
Yeah. But my point is, even though you're saying things that are potentially very offensive to people and could cost them money and, are insulting what they like in cars if they drive a 4-speed 930 or whatever, our comment section is measured. And the people who listen to we're really lucky in this regard. The people who listen to the podcast are willing to engage in discourse
on the merits
of something rather than just politicizing everything. It's for the reason we don't talk about politics on the show. I don't really care what your political views are because I hate you for them, and vice versa.
Independent of them,
independently. Oh, yeah, it's true. Because I hate all human beings equally.
That's not true.
Subaru drivers.
Yeah.
Is that what you're talking about?
Or any other number of choose victim of people towards whom you have continued animus. I mean, I'm the same way.
All people equally.
True.
That's true. Except those people who are demonstrating.
All animals were created equal, but some are more equal than others.
Listen, you go down that route all you want. I'm just saying I hate everyone, especially those people who are in my way. Mm-hmm. Anyone who's not in my way, I don't hate. I can get pretty close to some of the people who made some of the comments on X. I got very close to hating them more than others. But at the end of the day, they're just people, so I just hate them.
Okay. Anyway, we were probably making some kind of point.
Yeah, tough. The industry has changed. The journalism industry has changed in a lot of ways. Obviously, the obvious one is, the sort of rise of the influencer, the lack of qualified opinion. But that's not a dig on the people. There's no longer, we've talked about this in the past, there's no longer a structure where you have an editor and chief and then an entire organization of knowledge, editorial and institutional board, knowledge,
standards.
Right? Which is why we get away with this podcast. But we've sort of lost all of that, and that's one side of the sort of journalism has changed a lot. And then the flip side
that is a reflection in, I think, a broader change in society.
Yeah. Oh, sure. I mean, there are certainly those organizations still exist, right? There are the newspapers, that you can
they are
pay
sort of vanishingly small and sort of becoming peripheral in, I think, a lot of respects, which I find tragic.
I don't know. I hope.
I think widely consumed media doesn't get scrutinized or filtered or held to the same standards. I mean, we should try not to make this political, but there's certainly a lot of microphones in the hands of people who, by traditional standards, previous standards wouldn't have microphones in them, and you see that reflected in the nature of discourse and people's points of views in the public.
You're right, but what gives me hope is that you can. I'll choose an internet channel that's not political in any way. It's something like Veritasium. If you ever watch, okay, so it's a guy who does these videos that are just sciencey documentary videos, and it's a ingenious title, Veritasium, an element of truth. Mm-hmm. Okay, really cool. And the view counts are just always, everything he does are through the roof, and there are definite political commentary sites and news outlets and channels that I think also have huge viewership that do a good job, better job than most at trying to unearth the truth and fact checking both sides of every argument. This all comes down to
it's sort of self-selecting, and maybe that's something that I react to, is that the people who seek truth, who are not living in a post-facts world, those people get drawn to that place, and there's my ex's mom used to say, there's a lid for every trash can, right? People put themselves into the place where they hear the content that resonates with their philosophy, and there are outlets now that sort of operate totally divorced from objective fact, and that there is a place for those people to congregate. And I'm putting a value judgment on it that it's bad. Maybe there's some other side of the coin where you say, that is good. Everyone gets to sort of experience the planet in a way that is reflective of their philosophy. I mean, I don't know.
I think it leads to a lot of wars.
Yeah, there's a loss of decency also, which
that's a difference.
It is a different subject.
Given that we have not $1 in our swear jars, look at how decent we are.
I don't mean, you know what I mean.
Respectful social intercourse is what I'm talking
and the
about.
internet has created this in some sense because it's anonymized, right? It's just the same way that, and this is not exclusively like a new concept. I mean, people behave differently when they're in cars and when they do face-to-face, right? There is an anonymization or a sort of the creation of barriers, whether they are physical or virtual, between people, gives them license to be very undecent.
I think you do things in cars that you wouldn't do in person.
Absolutely.
Yeah, of course, we all do.
Yeah. It is the medium. It is a reflection of the medium and the intermediation of interactions between humans.
Right. And I think I look forward to a world in which there's pushback on that, and I hope that I can't predict the future, right? I can't predict future tech, but if there's a way to sort of quell the echo chamber effect, it would really be helpful. And it starts with reading your comments if you're or
if anyone's commenting
on what you're saying, right? And so the people who have the bigger microphones than most, and for at the risk of sounding stuck up, we do right now. We have a lot of people that listen to this.
Well,
we're holding ourselves to a higher standard.
Not compared to the like Joe Rogans of the world,
of course
obviously.
Not.
And the bigger your microphone, the greater your duty is to participate in the feedback.
Right. That's what I'm saying. I think the bigger your microphone is, the more you owe it to those who
that having been said, though, if they, I mean, the form of social currency is the accumulation of views, right? And so if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? If the metric is views, and that's the thing that the system values, that's the thing that creates, cost per CPM, right? Cost per 1,000 impressions or whatever, then like maybe that the incentives. This is like believing also fundamentally. Do you believe that wealth is a reflection of your value to society? If you believe that wealth is a reflection of your value to society, then it doesn't matter what you do if you end up with wealth. Right. The viewership is the same way. Depends on how sort of ruthless or decent or moral compass guided. Man, this is supposed to be about cars.
Listen, I would say that I'm not typically a philosophical person, but I'm definitely not a conspiracy theorist. However, there are very few things that are truly free will in a society such as ours. And just as Joe Rogan's decision to drive a truck every day isn't actually guided by his decision to drive a truck every day. We've talked about this in the past, right? The U.S. government exempted trucks and SUVs. Forget about Rogan, right? Just take the U.S. as a whole, right?
Yeah, driving around in SUVs.
60% of, or SUVs 60 or 70% of the market, whatever it is at this point. This just didn't happen by chance. This happened because the government made a series of decisions that exempted trucks and SUVs as off-road vehicles from fuel economy standards and from safety standards and all of this other stuff that's very expensive to car companies. And so as an end benefit to the consumer, these allow you to get more for less, right? So SUVs are cheaper overall than the cars are, and our gas is subsidized. By subsidized is possibly the wrong word. Our gas is relatively cheap, and all of these decisions that our government has made, have is there a verb for confluence? Have conflated. No, that's the wrong word.
Converged.
Have converged into a market that prefers SUVs, right? And you compare that directly to Japan, which has done the opposite and sort of encouraged people, residents of Japan, by financial means, same thing, to prefer K cars, little tiny itty bitty cars that happen to be more efficient, whatever else. And I find that dichotomy really interesting to look at. And the only thing I can say is maybe something will come along that will de-incentivize CPM or just view count and actually incentivize those who are trying to hold themselves to a higher standard than just somebody spouting out a bunch of opinion, or worse, presenting that opinion as fact and then not listening to any of the evidence to the contrary.
I don't believe that will happen, but maybe I'm cynical.
That's not good.
Yeah.
I hope it does.
Well, I mean, we're doing the best we can. I mean, we of course are not perfect, but everyone lives and behaves and makes decisions on the basis of their own sort of priorities and values and all that. And you're doing the same thing. And if that means that you take a stand by not continuing to cover modern cars or whatever the decision has to be, then people will at least understand to some extent why if they watch this episode.
Right. If they sit through the 3 hours of us talking about philosophy.
Yeah.
I hated all this stuff in college, like philosophy and sociology and blah, blah, blah.
Applications matter, right? If it doesn't have any applications or the applications don't resonate with you, then it's hard to sort of see the relevance.
I just don't care about concepts, yeah. But I do care about cars, and I would like to continue to be excited about them without being defecated upon by a bunch of people who have never driven these cars, never seen them in person, weren't there on the day, don't know what we really do.
This is why they don't read the comments.
Well, and the other thing, one last thing that I'm going to say about the sort of internet warriors who want to dissect, you're in track mode, therefore this happens. They are looking at these races frame by frame by frame by frame. And they're like, look, you can see that the taillight, in this one angle, you can see that the taillights on the Tesla were on for one frame longer than the taillights, or the brake lights, than the brake lights on the BMW. Therefore, they screwed up the whole race and screwed the whole thing, right? This is the same person who then they're that myopic and they're that microscopic and looking at it that closely that they stop the video and go frame by frame, but then don't notice that the next cut is looking back exactly at the angle that the camera had just been looking at.
And that there's no camera.
Right. We do that race 100 times, probably 50, and somewhere between 50 and 200 times, so that we can get the race from so many different angles to craft this idealized race without you ever seeing a camera, without you ever understanding how I, snap my fingers and stop time, right? This is clearly a crafted thing. And yet these people are so myopically focused on trying to prove that Jason Cammisa had ill will towards Tesla, that they don't even notice the bigger picture, that I don't actually get to stop time. And that, if you look, there's a shot of me in a car, and then the next shot is somebody else looking at me, and I don't have a camera on my head on that one. Hello, they necessarily have to be two different takes. So you can't use they launch differently here than this, whatever. It's all based on scientifically obtained numbers. And that's so
which
frustrating.
Happened not even on camera.
Didn't even have it on camera. We used not one frame of
the actual instrument to test it.
Right. Yep. And the only reason we had a camera on my head was because we knew what was going to happen, what the Tesla people were going to do. Right. So we just said, all right, forget it. I have a V-Box and a Draghi in the car. So I have two sets of data so I can verify if there's any anomalies. And also we have a camera watching exactly what I'm doing. Did I forget to turn off the air conditioning on that run? That could actually throw the results. No, I didn't. The air conditioning was off. It was 105 degrees outside and I was baking in the car, but it had a full tank of gas. The tires were exactly at the manufacturer recommended pressure. I did my job. Don't come for me. Or at least give me the opportunity to explain what happened, which is what I did to Tesla. Hey, I didn't accuse Tesla of anything. I just say, can you please shed some light on this? Like, did I really cost this race? The answer is, maybe a tenth of a second. Well, that wouldn't have been enough. I have the data.
Non-determinative outcome.
Well, I have the data down to the 100th of a second. 1/10 wouldn't have done it.
It's non-determinative, though. What does it say? It didn't change the result.
Wouldn't have changed the result. And so the point is, I guess, in summary, if you're upset that a Tesla Model 3 Performance lost a drag race to a BMW M3 CS on that day, on that track, in that location, go and love yourself privately in the bathroom, because no one wants to see that.
Okay. Well, that was uplifting. The whole thing was uplifting. Hopefully we can publish this one instead of having to pull the plug on
we didn't curse
on
once.
The last one.
I didn't scream.
Was that the problem?
It was a problem. I mean, listen, it was mostly just because I was so charged up about it. It just came across as there was one section where I just used a lot of F-bombs and looked directly in camera and told people to go love themselves. And it was just not...
Be fruitful and multiply.
Yeah. That's just not what we should be curmudgeonly, but being bitter is, I think, one step too far. And so there's no content that we left out. We covered exactly the same things. I took notes. But we just did it in, I think, a more thoughtful and adult way, which is actually proving the point that we feel like we have a sense of responsibility to come back here again in a construction zone with no AC yet. You're glowing, and on a hot day when you have better things to do and I have better things to do, to re-record this, because I don't think we did good enough for our audience. So
that is the Jason Cammisa way.
If I can make it better, I will. Well, also, if I can say the F-bomb. I wonder how many $100 bills I hear. 1, 2.
Okay.
3, 4.
Well, while Jason does that, we will conclude the episode. Thank you for joining us. Stay tuned or tune in next week for the Carmudgeon Show.
If you hadn't cursed in the intro, by the way, I would be saying, I don't know. I would say the F word so many times. Although you did curse in the intro, I can say it. Ready? Count of 3.
No.